I thought the breakup was the worst of it. The final, crushing blow. But then her text came through, weeks later, asking me out for coffee. And in that single, unbelievable moment, something shifted inside me. It wasn't just a breakup anymore, it was the chilling unraveling of years of manipulation, a twisted story I never saw coming. My name's Ethan. I'm 29, a system analyst here in Austin, Texas. And I need to tell you how someone can systematically dismantle your relationship right under your nose until it's all just rubble and you're left wondering what the hell just happened. 5 years. That's how long Chloe and I were together. 5 years building something I truly believed was solid, something real, something that felt like home. We met at a coffee shop near the university. She was sketching in a corner booth, head bent over her pad, and I was, let's be honest, pretending to work on a project, but really just trying to figure out how to talk to her without looking like a complete idiot. She was everything I wasn't, outgoing, spontaneous, always surrounded by people who thrived on her energy. I was the guy who'd rather spend a Friday night gaming with my online crew than hitting up crowded bars downtown. We balanced each other out. Or at least, that's what I told myself when things started to feel off. We moved in together after 2 years. Adopted a 3-legged rescue dog named Rocket who had more personality than most humans I knew. And I proposed last spring at that same coffee shop because, yeah, I'm apparently that kind of sentimental idiot. Chloe said yes before I even finished the question. For about 3 months after that, everything felt perfect. Like we'd finally cracked the code, figured out how to do life together the right way. Then Serena came back into the picture. And I mean really came back. Not just an occasional text or a birthday call, but suddenly, she was everywhere. Every plan, every decision, every conversation seemed to have Serena's shadow looming over it. Serena was Chloe's best friend from college. The kind of friendship with years of history that I could never fully understand, inside jokes I wasn't part of, shared experiences that predated me by a decade. I didn't mind at first. Everyone needs friends, right? I'm not the guy who gets jealous of his fiancée having a life outside our relationship. But Serena had this way of making me feel like I was constantly failing some invisible test. Little comments, seemingly harmless on the surface, but each one left me feeling a little smaller. She'd interrupt me mid-sentence when I was talking to Chloe. Not even rudely, just casually, like what I was saying wasn't important enough to finish. She'd roll her eyes when Chloe mentioned plans we'd made, like our beach camping trip or that gaming convention I'd been excited about for months. The worst part wasn't what Serena said to me directly. It was what she whispered to Chloe when I wasn't around. Seeds she planted that I wouldn't discover until way too late. It started small. Plans getting cancelled last minute because Serena needed Chloe for some emergency that never quite sounded like an actual emergency when I heard about it later. We were supposed to go to that gaming convention, tickets bought 3 months in advance, hotel booked, the whole weekend planned out. Then Serena called, crying about some guy who ghosted her. Suddenly, Chloe was canceling everything to go comfort her best friend. I said it was fine, because what else was I supposed to say? But it kept happening. A pattern emerged, me coming second to whatever crisis Serena was manufacturing that week. The beach camping trip got scrapped because Serena wanted Chloe to go to some wellness retreat that cost $800 and sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme disguised as self-care. Chloe started using phrases that didn't sound like her. Stuff like emotional labor and weaponized incompetence and love bombing. And I noticed she never explained what they meant or gave specific examples. She just dropped them into conversations like grenades and waited for me to apologize for things I didn't understand I was doing wrong. When I asked her to explain, she'd get defensive and say I was invalidating her feelings, which was another phrase that definitely didn't sound like something she'd come up with on her own. I started noticing Serena's influence everywhere. In the way Chloe suddenly cared about things she'd never mentioned before, in the way she'd repeat opinions almost word for word from conversations I knew they'd had without me. Chloe used to love our quiet evenings at home, cooking together, binge-watching whatever show we were into. But Serena kept telling her that staying home was boring, that I was isolating her from experiences, even though Chloe was usually the one suggesting we stay in. I'm an introvert. Always have been, always been upfront about it. My demanding job drains my social battery, and I recharge with quiet time, gaming with my crew, taking Rocket for long walks where I don't have to perform for anyone. Chloe knew this about me from day one. She said she loved that I was low-key, stable, that I didn't need constant entertainment. But suddenly, Serena was in her ear, telling her that my personality was a red flag, that I was controlling her social life by not wanting to go out every single night. The gaslighting was so subtle, so insidious, I didn't even recognize it until months later, when the whole picture finally became clear. One night, Chloe came home from drinks with Serena and told me we needed to talk. I knew from her tone that this wasn't going to be a normal conversation about bills or weekend plans. She sat down on the couch, wouldn't look me in the eye, and started listing off things I apparently did wrong, things I didn't even remember doing, or that were so twisted from what actually happened that I barely recognized the events she was describing. She said I was dismissive of her needs because I'd gone to bed early one night when she wanted to watch a movie. Never mind, I'd worked a 12-hour shift fixing a critical system failure and was barely functional. She said I was financially controlling because I asked if we should maybe budget better after she spent $600 on concert tickets for her and Serena without mentioning it first. She said I didn't support her dreams because I suggested she maybe finish her graphic design certification before quitting her stable job to freelance full-time with 0 clients lined up. Every accusation had Serena's fingerprints all over it. I could practically hear her voice saying these things, but Chloe delivered them like they were her own thoughts, her own feelings, her own conclusions about who I was as a partner. I tried to defend myself, but every response just seemed to prove her point somehow. Like the game was rigged, and I was always going to lose no matter what I said. When I pointed out that I'd supported her career change and just wanted a financial safety net, she said I was mansplaining her own life to her. When I reminded her that I'd encouraged her to hang out with friends and never tried to stop her, she said I was rewriting history and gaslighting her. About my own controlling behavior. The words were coming out of Chloe's mouth, but they were Serena's words. Serena's interpretations, Serena's reality being forced onto our relationship like a filter that distorted everything we'd built together. That's when I realized my relationship had a third person in it. And that third person had more influence over my fiancé than I ever would. And there was nothing I could do to compete with years of friendship, trust, and history that existed long before I ever came into the picture. The breaking point came on a Thursday in October. I woke up feeling like someone had replaced my blood with concrete and set my throat on fire. My temperature was 102 degrees. Even lifting my head off the pillow felt like climbing a mountain. I texted Chloe, asking if she could grab some medicine on her way home because I genuinely didn't think I could make it to the pharmacy without passing out. She read the message. I saw the little red receipt pop up, and then, nothing. For 3 hours, I lay there, alternating between sweating through my sheets and shivering so hard my teeth chattered. When she finally came home, Serena was with her. That should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to go the way I hoped. Instead of checking on me or asking what I needed, Chloe stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, like I'd personally offended her by being sick. Serena was right behind her, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. Then Chloe said the words that I still can't fully believe came out of her mouth. She said Serena thought I was being manipulative by asking for help, and that I was a grown man who should be able to take care of myself without making it her responsibility. I just stared at her. What do you even say to that? How do you respond when your fiancé tells you that needing basic support during an illness is actually emotional manipulation? Before I could form any kind of coherent response, she grabbed her overnight bag from the closet and said she was staying at Serena's place for a few days because she needed space from my toxic behavior. The worst part wasn't even that she left. It was the petty cruelty of what she took with her. She grabbed the thermometer off my nightstand. And the last roll of toilet paper from the bathroom. It sounds almost funny when I say it out loud, but in that moment, it felt like she was deliberately trying to make my life harder, just to prove some point I didn't understand. I heard the apartment door close. Then it was just me and Rocket, who jumped up on the bed and put his head on my chest like he knew something was really wrong this time. Not just the regular kind of wrong, but the kind that changes everything. I managed to get myself to the kitchen and found some expired ibuprofen in the back of a drawer. Took twice the recommended dose because I was desperate. Then I did something I almost never do. I reached out to my online gaming crew and told them what was happening. These were guys I'd been playing with for years. People I'd never met in person, but who knew me better than most of my real-life friends. Within an hour, 3 of them had sent food delivery to my apartment. And one of them, Noah, who actually lived here in Austin, showed up with a care package of medicine, Gatorade, and soup his wife had made. We'd been running raids together for 4 years. He sat in my living room for 2 hours, making sure I ate something and didn't die, while I explained the whole situation with Chloe and Serena, and how I felt like I was losing my mind trying to understand what I'd done wrong. Noah listened to everything, then said something that stuck with me. He said it sounded like Chloe had outsourced her thinking to someone who didn't have her best interests at heart, and that sometimes people get so deep into toxic friendships they can't see how much damage is being done until it's too late. I spent the next 3 days recovering alone, except for Rocket and the friends who checked in on me. It gave me way too much time to think about everything that had happened over the past year. All the little moments I'd ignored or explained away because I loved Chloe and wanted to believe we could work through anything. On the 4th day, she came back to the apartment while I was at work. I knew she'd been there because half her stuff was gone, and there was a note on the counter. Written in her handwriting, but using vocabulary that I recognized as a Serena specialty. The note talked about emotional labor and how I'd failed to meet her needs and how she deserved a partner who didn't make her responsible for managing my feelings. Which was ironic, considering I'd spent the last year walking on eggshells, trying not to upset her, while she criticized everything I did through Serena's lens of what a relationship should look like. That evening, Chloe texted me, asking to talk in person. We met at a coffee shop 3 blocks from our apartment, because apparently our home wasn't neutral enough territory for this conversation. She had this rehearsed quality to the way she spoke, like she'd practiced these lines with Serena until they sounded natural. She went through a whole list of my red flags, which included things like me being too independent, not emotionally available enough, prioritizing my career over her needs, and something about how my introversion was actually an avoidant attachment style, which apparently she'd learned about from some podcasts Serena had recommended. I listened to all of it and realized I was basically being broken up with using pop psychology terms and therapy speak that had been weaponized to make normal human behavior sound like pathology. When she finally paused to take a breath, I asked her one question, "Chloe, are any of these thoughts actually yours? Or are you just repeating what Serena told you to think?" She got defensive immediately and said I was invalidating her experience and proving her point about being dismissive. Then she said she needed me to move out of the apartment, even though my name was the only one on the lease, and I'd been paying 70% of the rent for 3 years. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the audacity was almost impressive. I told her very calmly that I'd be happy to give her time to find a new place, since this was my apartment, and I wasn't going anywhere. She didn't like that answer. I could see her mentally scrambling to figure out how to regain control of the situation. She made one last attempt by saying we could work things out if I was willing to go to therapy and address my issues. I asked what issues specifically, and she couldn't give me concrete examples, just more buzzwords about emotional unavailability and stonewalling and defensive behavior. And I realized, right there in that coffee shop, that I'd already lost her months ago. Lost her to someone who saw our relationship as a threat to her. "On hold over Chloe." I said, "Okay." I told her she had 2 weeks to get her remaining stuff out of the apartment, and I walked away from 5 years like it was the easiest decision I'd ever made. Even though inside, I felt like someone had scooped up my chest and left nothing but empty space where my future used to be. The next morning, I woke up to a text saying she'd thought about it overnight and we were definitely over, and she'd be by that afternoon with Serena to collect her things. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. When they showed up, Serena had this smug look on her face, like she'd won some competition I didn't know we were having. I just stood there, watching them pack up pieces of my life into boxes and bags. After they left, the apartment felt enormous and suffocating at the same time. Too quiet, and too full of memories that now felt contaminated by everything that had happened. I did what I always do when life gets overwhelming. I threw myself into work. Started going to the gym at 5 a.m. before my shift, because physical exhaustion was easier to deal with than emotional devastation. My online crew checked in on me constantly. Noah invited me to his house for dinner with his family twice a week. Slowly, I started rebuilding some version of a life that didn't revolve around making Chloe happy or trying to meet standards that kept changing based on whatever Serena decided was acceptable that week. About 2 weeks after the breakup, Chloe showed up at my door unannounced, Rocket on a leash. She said she couldn't handle taking care of him anymore because he kept whining and wouldn't eat. And she realized she'd only taken him to hurt me in the first place. I took him back without a word. I wasn't about to punish my dog for her mistakes. And honestly, having Rocket back made the apartment feel less empty, like I'd recovered at least one piece of what we'd built together. 3 weeks passed. I was actually starting to feel okay. Not great, but functional. Then Chloe started texting me again with weird messages that started casual and progressively got stranger. She'd ask my opinion on things she'd never cared about before. She'd mention how Serena was being really intense lately, and maybe they were spending too much time together, like she was testing the waters to see if I'd take her back. I kept my responses short and polite, because I'm not cruel, and we'd shared 5 years of life together. But I wasn't about to fall back into that trap of being her emotional support while Serena pulled the strings behind the scenes. Then I got a message from the last person I ever expected. A message that made me realize this whole situation was so much worse and so much stranger than I'd ever imagined. And it came from Serena herself. It came through on a Saturday morning while I was meal prepping for the week. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake, or maybe her account had been hacked, because there was no universe where this made sense. She said Chloe had been struggling since the breakup, and that watching us fall apart had made Serena realize some things about herself, about me, about what she actually wanted. And then she said the words that made my brain completely short-circuit: "You deserved better than someone who couldn't appreciate what you brought to a relationship." I stared at my phone for a solid minute, trying to process what was happening. Then another message came through. This one with a selfie of Serena at some coffee shop, with the caption asking if I wanted to grab drinks sometime and talk about everything that had happened because she felt terrible about how things had gone down. The audacity was so staggering that I actually laughed out loud. This woman had systematically destroyed my relationship over the course of a year, convinced my fiancé that I was toxic and controlling, and every other buzzword she could weaponize. And now she was shooting her shot like we were potential romantic interests who'd just met at a bar. I screenshotted everything immediately and sent it to Noah, because I needed someone else to confirm I wasn't hallucinating this situation. He responded within seconds, saying this was the most unhinged thing he'd seen in his entire life and that I needed to be very careful about how I handled it. Over the next 2 days, Serena kept messaging me, escalating from casual coffee suggestions to more overtly flirty comments about how she'd always thought I was attractive and intelligent, and that Chloe had been too immature to recognize what she had. She said we'd always had chemistry, and that she'd held back out of loyalty to Chloe. But now that we were both single, there was no reason we couldn't explore what could happen between us. The whole thing felt like I was trapped in some psychological thriller where the villain reveals themselves in the third act. I showed everything to Noah and 2 other friends from my gaming crew who lived local, guys named Leo and Miles, who I'd finally met in person after years of online friendship. We spent an entire evening trying to figure out what Serena's actual angle was, because this couldn't just be about wanting to date me. Leo had a theory that made way too much sense. He said some people are addicted to control and drama, and that Serena had probably gotten bored once she'd successfully broken up me and Chloe, because there was no more chaos to orchestrate. He thought maybe Serena saw me as a challenge now, someone who'd rejected her influence and walked away with dignity, and that trying to date me was really about proving she could still manipulate my life if she wanted to. Miles pointed out something even darker: if Serena succeeded in getting me to go out with her, it would destroy any chance of Chloe and me ever reconciling. And it would also position Serena as the person who ended up with the prize after convincing Chloe to throw it away. The more we talked about it, the more I realized this wasn't about attraction or genuine interest. This was about power and control, and feeding whatever psychological need Serena had to be at the center of other people's relationships. I decided I wasn't going to just ignore her or block her number. I was going to expose exactly who she was to everyone who'd been pulled into her orbit. But I needed to be smart about it, because going on the attack without proof would just make me look like the bitter ex she'd already painted me as to Chloe. I started documenting everything. Every message Serena sent got screenshotted with timestamps. And I reached out to a few people in Chloe's social circle who I'd stayed friendly with, to ask if they'd noticed anything weird about Serena's behavior over the years. 2 of them came back with stories that made my blood run cold. Apparently, I wasn't the first relationship Serena had torpedoed. One woman told me about her own ex-boyfriend 3 years ago, who Serena had convinced was emotionally abusive, using the same playbook of therapy speak and pop psychology to create problems where none existed. That relationship had ended with her isolated from the guy who she later realized had been perfectly good to her. Another friend had a similar story about someone whose marriage Serena had nearly destroyed by convincing the wife that her husband was gaslighting her. It had taken months of actual couples therapy for them to realize the real problem was Serena's interference. I collected all of this information like I was building a legal case. Then I did something that felt risky but necessary. I told Serena I'd be willing to meet her for coffee to talk about everything. She responded immediately with obvious excitement, suggesting a place and time. I agreed to meet her that following Thursday at a cafe in South Congress that had outdoor seating and lots of foot traffic. What Serena didn't know was that Noah, Leo, and Miles would all be there at nearby tables. And that the 2 people I'd talked to had agreed to show up halfway through to confront her about the pattern of behavior we'd uncovered. The day came, and I got there early to settle my nerves. Ordered a coffee I was too anxious to actually drink, and waited for Serena to arrive with this weird mix of anger and curiosity about how she'd play this. She showed up looking like she'd put serious effort into her appearance, which made the whole thing even more unsettling. She sat down across from me with this smile I can only describe as predatory, like she'd already won something I didn't know we were competing for. She started talking immediately about how proud she was that I'd agreed to meet her, how mature it was that we could move past the drama with Chloe and explore our own connection. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before I interrupted her. I asked her directly why she'd spent a year destroying my relationship with Chloe if she was interested in me. And I watched her face shift through several expressions before landing on defensive confusion. She tried to claim she'd only been looking out for Chloe's best interests and that it wasn't her fault Chloe had realized I wasn't the right fit. But I pulled out my phone and started reading back her own messages about how she'd always been attracted to me and had held back out of loyalty. Her face went pale, and she tried to backtrack, saying I was misunderstanding her intentions and making this into something it wasn't. And that's when the 2 other people walked up to our table. They confronted her about destroying their relationships using the exact same tactics. I watched Serena's whole demeanor crumble as she realized this wasn't a date. It was an intervention. She tried to leave, but Noah, Leo, and Miles had positioned themselves in a way that made it clear she wasn't going anywhere until we'd said our piece. And for the first time since I'd known her, Serena had no control over the situation she was in. Noah laid out everything we'd discovered about her pattern of interference in other people's relationships. The therapy speak she used as weapons, the way she isolated people from their partners under the guise of protecting them. Leo talked about how her behavior fit classic patterns of covert manipulation and control, using his background in psychology from his actual degree to break down what she'd been doing in clinical terms that couldn't be dismissed as bitter accusations. Serena sat there, getting smaller and smaller. Then she made one last attempt to flip the script by saying we were all ganging up on her and that this was harassment, but her voice had none of its usual confidence, and everyone at the surrounding tables was now watching this play out. I told her very clearly that if she ever contacted me again, or if I found out she was interfering in Chloe's life or anyone else's life the way she'd interfered in mine, I would make sure everyone in her social and professional circles knew exactly who she was and what she did to people. She grabbed her bag and basically ran out of the cafe. And I felt this weird combination of satisfaction and exhaustion, like I'd won something, but the victory cost more than I'd expected. The next day, Chloe called me. Actually called, not texted. And her voice sounded different, smaller, more unsure than I'd heard in over a year. She said Serena had blocked her on everything, and that mutual friends had been telling her things about Serena's past behavior that made her sick to her stomach. And she asked if we could meet to talk about what had really happened between us. I told her I needed time to think about whether that was something I wanted. Because even though part of me still loved the person she'd been before Serena got into her head, I wasn't sure I could trust her not to fall into the same pattern with the next toxic friend who came along. 2 months have passed since that confrontation at the cafe. I got a promotion at work that came with a significant raise and more interesting projects. I started dating someone named Harper, who I met through Noah's wife, and who's into gaming and hiking and has a refreshingly direct communication style that doesn't involve any therapy speak or manufactured drama. Chloe reached out one more time, asking if I'd be willing to do closure coffee. I said maybe someday, but not now. Because I've learned that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let the wrong people stay in your past, where they belong. I'm doing okay now. Better than okay, actually. And I've learned that you should never build a life with someone who lets a toxic friend think for them. Because eventually, you'll realize you're not in a relationship with one person. You're in a relationship with whoever has their ear that week. And that's not love. That's just elaborate puppetry with your heart as the stage. What do you think about this whole situation?